Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 72, and it's an OverStreet special.
Boom!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Whoa. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 72, and it's a super spectacular today. Mr. Scala, get us in the mood. Tell us what we got to do.
Let's get in the mood, everyone. And if you're watching this live, if you're watching this recorded, please look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. And gentlemen, we're live tonight for a little bit of a special. We got two great friends in the house.
Oh,
and without further ado, guys, what do we got going on?
Well, Steve, this one is near and dear to your heart. This is like holding little holy Bibles in their hands. If I can, this is religion. Steve, tell us what's going on today.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, this is no exaggeration. This is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. We are going to be talking about the OverStreet comic book price guide today. We have some great news that's coming up, brand new, but we're also going to delve into the history. I know we have, of course, Mr. J.C. Vaughn, who has been basically Mr. OverStreet these last couple of years, and we have Brian Pulido, who has his own original copy of his first OverStreet that he's got. Can't wait to get into the weeds there, But basically, for all of us people who are OverStreet maniacs, I started it with, volume 15, okay? We are going to get into some really, really great stuff. We've got two really great guests, and we really are going to be up to our neck in Nerd and Geek 101.
Yeah.
Do you have a neck? You got it, right? Well, I don't know.
Steve likes that. Steve loves that. Oh, and before we bring out the guests, I just have to throw this out there. If anybody saw that picture we put up of Steve at the TNA wrestling, and he looked like Thanos in the background, that was the cutest thing in the world. You just see Steve. Steve, I love you, brother. I love you so much, and I love seeing you happy. You look like a giant amongst all these little guys. You were bigger than the wrestler too. It was awesome. It was great to see you and all that stuff. So that was fun. Okay, but now we got to get to the real stuff. This is the great stuff. Oh, let me just say before I bring out our guest, our esteemed guest, seeing that intro, which was magnificent, Niall. Thank you so much for playing that. I do remember in all my years of collecting, I only bought one when I was a young kid, and seeing all those covers, I bought that Snow White one, the one with Snow White on it. I think that was 87. Is that true? Was 1987?
That sounds about right, because my one was 85.
Yeah, and I had all my comics in this little corner of my room, and I remember getting the OverStreet, and I felt like I used to call it John's Heroes World because it was my little world. But having that price guide, I felt like I had my own comic store. So I'm just saying, when I saw that, it brought back some great memories. See, Steve loves hearing that stuff. He loves it because he can understand. Okay, but Steve, without further ado, let's introduce our guest. Now, why don't you introduce these big bad boys?
Yes, first and foremost, let's bring in. He's a great dear friend of the show. Some of you know him as Tex. Some of you know him as the Iceman, the bald Iceman, and others know him as the OverStreet man himself. Everyone, please welcome our dear friend, Mr. JC Vaughn, to the show. JC,
it's frozen bald guy now.
Frozen bald guy. Yes. That was from like our test days.
Literally, that was the pilot episode of Crowdfunding Comics.
They're like, oh, so who's this guy? Well, we'll call him Frozen Bald Guy.
Because that's what happened with the technical problems.
Exactly. All right, John, who's our next guest?
Oh, why don't you give this guy a big shout out?
Okay, now, Mr. Brian Pulido, you may think, he doesn't know much. You scratch beneath the surface, my friends. And then he will unleash knowledge on you. Even I was like, whoa. And if you open up that Pandora's box of Captain America, you better be able to step up, okay? Because otherwise he's going to run right over you. And he's so fun and, no ego, very gracious. I'm so glad he's here, Mr. Brian Pulido.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for having me. And what a fun subject. Like you boys were saying, I did bust out my first OverStreet, which is number 6 from 1976. You will not believe the prices in here. We'll get into it.
Yeah, and Brian, did you see the little dedication to you that Steve's wearing right there on his chest? Maybe that's a little.
I love it, man. He's speaking my language. That's my guy. Everybody knows Captain America. Been reading Cap since July 1974, and I know. Some of you might be out there looking, oh, the Lady Death guy, outlaw comic publisher, doesn't know anything about comics. Well, son, you're going to get knowledge.
Awesome. So obviously, this is going to be a great discussion on the history of OverStreet. But before we get into that, we do have to do a shout out that you and Billy Tucci, drawn by Billy Tucci, on the newest OverStreet that's going to be coming out is Lady Death and She. Niall, do we got a picture of that we can show? This is going to be the 2024 and the 2025 a price guide. And once again, love seeing my good friends, people I love and care about, Billy, Brian, all you guys. It is such a great dedication. I couldn't help but promote this all over my social media. But just to tell you people out there, we're not going to get into discussion about that because we're going to use that as a later date. And I know Mr. Tucci's not here. He's on another television show right now. And but they're gonna have Brian and Mr. Vaughn here. They're gonna be with Brian. With Billy on one of the episodes. What episode will it be on now?
Well, yeah, we're going to do that as a Thursday night live.
And then they're going to get into the weeds of talking about the making and the creation of that cover and what they feel about it. But that's not what we're doing. We're going into the history. That's why we got Mr. Vaughn down there. We're going into the weeds.
Say one thing about this book. This is only the second time we've done joining covers.
Wow.
And I, on a personal level, couldn't be more excited than to do it with two indie creators who have more than weathered the storm. I guess I should say storms of 30 years worth of comic book publishing, in a business where even Marvel and DC characters come and go within that time span. They've stayed true to their visions for their characters. They've done things that nobody else has done with their characters, and they have reaped the benefit of devoted fans for those characters because of their pioneering spirit, because of their vision. And this isn't going too far down the rabbit hole about this cover itself. It's more about their fans and their approach to the business, and why I, as the guy who sort of picks most of the covers, felt absolutely comfortable putting these two indie icons on the cover of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide 54.
Wow. Yeah. And
Great.
correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, is 2024 the 30th anniversary for Lady Death #1?
It is. So, I mean, that's probably the one thing I would love to say is that it's an honor to be on the Overstreet Price Guide, but it is also equally an honor that my brother, Billy, rendered the cover, because he and I literally, as you will learn in a future show, have just been through it together, you know, as dear friends, as brothers, literally since the beginning. The release of Lady Death 1 and She 1 was less than about a month apart.
Oh,
And that, along with the relaunch of Umbrella #1 in 1994, in my case, it was February 9, 1994. This created a phenomenon that the comics press dubbed the bad girl craze, which we benefited from. But yeah, the main piece I want to get across on this is the idea that the cover is rendered by Billy is just, you know, warms my heart. It's amazing to have that kind of, you know, friendship and relationship that stands the test of time.
yeah.
Is amazing.
Yeah, great. Okay, Steve, why don't you start us off and where we're going to go with this, because you are also a contributor to that little holy Bible, you call it.
Yes, and it's no lie. I think, well, it's no exaggeration, but the time that I actually met Bob Overstreet at San Diego is one of the most incredible moments of my life. JC was there, and it's embarrassing. Lucky enough, there's no film footage, because it's literally in it.
There are some photos.
There's photos. But lucky enough, no one was videoing it, because I'm slathering. I'm literally just I'm having an out of body experience, because
you know what, Steve? I buy the out of body experience, because I've met people like that in my life. But you weren't blabbering, you weren't you know, you were fairly composed for a gushing fanboy.
yes, and you know, I was just literally you know, it's up there with meeting John Buscema for me. That's how powerful it was. And, you know, the fact that the Overstreet had such an amazing effect. Now, of course, Brian, I wasn't as lucky as you to start that early. I'd love to have picked up, you know, volume 6 and been reading and collecting in '76. But I'm only a young person. I'm only 29 years old, so I wasn't around back then.
You're the baby.
Yes, I'm very, very young. So I don't start until volume 15, which is the original Captain Marvel cover, you know, CC Beck.
Oh, yeah.
However, once I purchased that book, I was empowered, because I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know anything about the publishers. I didn't know who, what, why, when, what issues went for how long, and what were the title changes. And so quite quickly, within the space of about 2 months of reading the Overstreet every night, religiously, you know, after a while, people were like, wow, yeah, you know, when you want to talk comics, you've got to talk to Steve. And I was like this. Yes, what do you want to know? Oh, Timely. Yeah. Oh, Atlas. Oh, Harvey. You know, and realistically speaking, I still was, you know, a babe in the woods. But the Overstreet opened up my eyes. And also, it made me so jealous, because when I opened up the advertisements, I saw these American comic shops, and I was like, wait a minute, that guy's selling an X-Men 1 as if it's nothing, you know. And over in England, you know, it was just like this, King Arthur mythological realm of like, and the Americans are driving along in, hey, look at my AR-15, and I'm like, I've got to get over there. So I come at it at a different angle, a different view, because, I'm living in a small, little, tiny English town. Our comic shop has 2 long boxes for back issues, and there I am going through and looking at the ads and looking at what the people saying, complete Marvel and DC stock for sale. I'm like, who has complete Marvel and DC stock? Oh, my God. And I was like, look how cheap it is. $2 for this, $2 for that.
Damn you Americans.
Like, yeah, those spoiled Yanks, and it was back then I was thinking, I have to find a way to get over there somehow, because being over here is not helping me. I need to be over there. I need to be up to my neck in it. So the OverStreet to me is, apart from the actual reading and collecting of the comics itself, it's the most important thing and gave and empowered me tremendously. And I'm sure, I know Brian probably has the same experience once he opened up that book.
It's true. One of the things that I recall earlier, even before my first OverStreet, was buying my first copies of X-Men 1 and Daredevil 1.
Oh.
Now, remember, both these comics have predominantly white covers. Very, very difficult to find in very nice shape. But in 1971, I was able to track them down at a place called Passaic Book Center. This place was a mess. It was like a pre-hoarder kind of place.
Yeah.
They literally had these nice comic books. I don't even think they were in bags, in a little safe. They opened it up. It was a mess, and I bought them. So I think I bought, I don't know which one I spent more for, but I think I bought Daredevil 1 for $8, and I bought X-Men #1 for $12. It was a lot of money. My parents were like, my dad was like, this is not a good idea. My mother was
right.
My mother's more like, let's foster his creative spirit. But years later, you look at it, and it's like, relative to the time, I might have paid top of the market. So,
yeah.
If we were to track a 40-year chart, you did okay with those books,
right?
Well, okay, so that's presupposing I kept them.
Oh, okay.
However, I became an adolescent. Testosterone ran through my body.
No, right. Not the women. Not the women.
I blame the women.
Yeah. we all have to get to that.
I'm like, now wait a minute. I could sell this X-Men 1. I could get enough money to get some cool cowboy boots. I will look cool, and I may be able to attract this girl. So that's the story of what happened with that particular set.
And I'm guessing you don't have the boots either.
I don't have the boots.
Yeah.
Okay. Great if he just lifted up his foot and he's like, still got him.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Vaughn, why don't you tell us, let's go back and let's talk about, so maybe some people don't know out there, let's talk about the history of OverStreet and how that came of age. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Bob OverStreet was one of the early, very active EC Comics collectors. Somebody else would have done a price guide about comics, but it wouldn't have been Bob without the ECs. Bob still loves the ECs to this day and can get in. And he was there when Russ Cochran and Bill Gaines cracked out the Gaines file copies.
Wow.
They were there with gloves on, looking at them, evaluating them. But Bob was also a coin collector. And so getting all over his home state as a kid with his best friend Landon Chesney, trying to upgrade copies, trying to get copies that they didn't get in their town, that kind of thing. Bob was also a coin guy, and he worked with the local bank and sorted out coins and things like that. And so he understood collecting. He understood price guides. Jerry Bales, who of course is one of the pioneering collectors, and a number of other people said, "Oh, do this, Bob. We'll help you." Until it came time to actually do it, and Bob was still looking for somebody to unload it on, and nobody would step up, and so he did it himself. And for about the first 2 months, he thought he was done. Here's the list, here's the price guide, that's it. And then corrections started coming in. and there's a few corrections between the 1970 original white cover and the 71 reprint. There's a few corrections in there, and then it became a thing. And the great thing I can say about it is that is the spirit of the Overstreet comic book price guide and our online incarnation, Overstreet Access, is that we're only as good as the information we get. If advisors don't, or fans don't send in records of sales, or, hey, you screwed up on this comic, this isn't this artist, or this is this artist, but he has a different inker on this one. All the kind of notations that made the guide what it is came from somebody. And it is one of the most exciting things is I can tell you that at 85 years old, Bob says the guide keeps him young. And he also, I heard a description, my former boss, John K. Snyder Jr., said this, and I thought it was one of the most accurate things I ever heard about Bob. The only thing that Bob is dogmatic about is trying to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he doesn't do artificially high prices. He doesn't do artificially low prices. He doesn't say, "Oh, I don't get Deadpool. It shouldn't be worth that much." It's nothing like it's nothing like that. It is like for instance, when I wanted to make the move to go from the April release to the San Diego preview night release, Bob was against it. But you know what he said to me? He said, "Talk to the advisors, find out what they say." I came back, they were uniformly in favor of it. And Bob goes, "Okay." You know, it wasn't about what he wanted. It was about what was good for the business, what was good for the hobby. I'm going to ramble a little bit, but I was really proud when San Diego brought him for Overstreet number 40 as a guest to the show. He is such a straight arrow about the pricing that was literally the first time he ever let a show pay his way.
Well,
And you realize how many shows that guy had been to over his career. He's only, I mean, literally only during COVID has he stopped finally traveling to conventions.
you know, when I'm going to just say, I have in my collection, I couldn't find it, but I know it's in there, that back in the 90s, I picked up a video cassette, a VHS, and it was an Overstreet one. And it talked to people at conventions, and they talked to celebrities. And then every now and then they put up an issue, and then they talked about the price of it. But that was the first time I saw Bob Overstreet, because he was on it and he was talking about how it was time to make a price guide, how the industry needed one, and he filled that void. But it was so funny with me being young back then and watching that. I was like, oh my God, that's him. That's his real name. Like it was so baffling to me, and to actually see him.
And I have to tell you how rare that is. Bob freaking hates being interviewed.
Oh, wow.
And we have one that is fairly definitive that he and I worked on three different times since Price Guide 33. And it's called The Semi-Secret Origin of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide. And he honestly, in a one-on-one situation, talking with me and working to get it right, super conversational. He's not shy about anything or anything like that, but he just doesn't like the public speaking aspect. Whereas with me, as you guys I've already demonstrated this evening, the task is getting me to shut up.
But what I was saying though, like when I knew his name was Overstreet, Brian, you're like this. What I first thought about, I was like, oh my God, that's like Eddie Van Halen. You know, they named the band after the actual name and the book after. I just thought that was so cool. And I didn't know about Jerry Bales kind of being in there, because you think of how prominent Alter Ego is, which is still going on today with Roy. You got Overstreet still leading the way too.
That's where those guys in the early days of fandom are all connected. And, you know, Jim Shooter has a phrase that he uses regularly when he's describing the creators that went before us. He's saying the giants on whose shoulders we stand.
Yeah.
And we've got our own. I mean, the secondary market owes Bob Overstreet more than they're ever going to acknowledge. And that's fine. He didn't do it for the acknowledgement. He did it to get it right. But Jerry Bales and you know, Roy carrying on that legacy and everything else like that. This, and you look at Michael Yori with Back Issue, we've still got people like this doing this, you know, and there's no amount of pay for the work that they put in,
Of course, yeah.
you know, and they deserve every blessing they get their way, every bonus they get their way, whatever befalls them that's good is absolutely. And I'm stammering because I'm in awe of those guys.
Yeah.
You know, they got out there and they organized what we have now.
Yeah, great. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
You know, it's funny. I wanted to bring the subject down to the basic terms, and Brian will understand this 100%. Of course, he had the advantage of knowing who, what, why, and when pretty early. Because if I'd been able to buy an X-Men 1 or a Daredevil 1, which means that
crazy.
That means that Brian already knew about Tales to Suspense, Tales to Astonish, and Strange Tales. He already knew about that. I didn't. So when I first went to, by the way, it wasn't in a comic shop. It was some chintzy little liquor place that had a rack of comics. And this is the summer of '83. So I'm looking at the issue numbers, and I look at it and I go, oh, okay, Fantastic Four 284. Oh wow, so it's 284 months. 200. Oh, Captain America 338. I thought Fantastic Four with Hulk. Oh, Hulk 228. I was like, I don't understand the numbering. I don't,
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that I was still at school, and there was a couple of school, comic people, and I was like, hey, can you explain? I said, how come Captain America numbers are so high? And there was this little kid. I remember he went like this. You need to find yourself an OverStreet. And I was like, what's an OverStreet? And he goes, it's like a Bible, but it has all the information you need, and you're going to find out. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's what I'm talking about right here, because obviously in '83, I'm not going to pick up my phone and go, hey, Google.
Yeah.
I had to ask people. And at the time, if I went into a bookshop, there wasn't any reference stuff about comics. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? So I told Bob this when I met him, when I got the guide, and of course I'm a Marvel maniac, I went through page by page and wrote down every single Marvel title in this little pad, every single one, and I wrote the dates. And that was when I was like, oh, Hulk 1 through 6. Oh, no, 7. Oh, Tales to Astonish.
Yeah.
Oh, the Hulk 102. Ah, then the Captain Americas, and I can't explain it. It was just like, oh my God, it was like this information is washing over me. And then I had the keys to get in and start asking, my comic dealer. And by the way, our English comic dealer, and when I said, do you have any Tales to Astonish? He was like that. Don't even ask. You're never going to see that, Steve. And I'm like, never? And he goes, no. He goes, I got to London. I've never seen any Tales to Astonish.
Wow.
So in a way, I was like heartbroken. But that there encapsulates what happened to me. Suddenly, I was aware of Tales to Astonish, Strange Tales, Journey into Mystery, and I looked at the pricing at the time I think in '85, Hulk #1 was $600.
Yeah.
In their mint, $600. And at the time, I was thinking, okay, $600, that's the equivalent of like, that's like £200. £200! Oh my God. And then, because at the time I had like 25 cents to my name to buy a book. And I was like, I'm never going to get those. But I had my list finally. And I marvel at my ability to spend so much time on that. I mean, if you asked me to do that now, like I've got 5 minutes. I spent like a month going through, and then I had to try and work out, which titles were canon, not canon. So obviously, Brian, you starting a little bit earlier, you already had this information. So when you were looking through the guide, what was it that you were grabbing from the guide the most?
Well, really, what's helpful, just like, keying off what you were saying, the notion that Captain America did not start in issue 100, that he started in Tales of Suspense 58, informed my young self, and that helped me start going after it. So I would go up to those Phil Suling comic art conventions, 1974, 5, 6, and I start filling out my collection. So I completed my Tales of Suspense and kept it. Girlfriends regardless. Day. And I had it filled out probably within 2 years. So by 76, I locked Cap, and I've just been in like that holding pattern, staying current ever since. But without the guide, how would I know? Because I would have logically probably thought that, well, Captain America, in a sense, could have started from number 1 onward. But I'm, of course, thinking of more or less, Silver Age, his modern appearance since Avengers 4. But it was things like the guide, though, that would inform me to know that the actual modern reappearance of Captain America was Avengers 4. Or arguably, what is it? Strange Tales, is it 113?
114.
The month before.
Yeah, 114 with the Acrobat.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the guide, helped me when I was trying to be a completist to track down all my Cap major appearances.
How long did it take you to get the Avengers 4?
I bought my excuse me, guys, getting over a cold. My Avengers 4.
Look, he's dying to say it. Let it out.
I lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, and across the street from where I lived was a place called Interstate Video World. They rented VHS tapes. They sold ice cream and comic books. They just had these long boxes full of comics. And I plucked out an Avengers number 4 in 1987. And I paid $6 for it. I still have it.
How much did you spend for it?
$6.
Oh.
And they were happy to get it.
Oh, of course. I got to ask you this, though, Brian. When you're looking through that OverStreet and then you find out there's a Golden Age Captain America collection, how did that make you feel? I mean, did you want to get those, or you discredited those, or like how? Because that would have been like, oh my God, I got all this, but now I got to get this. Tell me.
To be honest with you, it is only till recently, meeting Steve, where I finally gave into CAGA.
Yes.
Because in my view, the comics that I've been reading along the way are kind of the soundtrack or the story of my life.
Yeah, of course.
So those way far in the past comics were from another time. But having completed Cap for so many years, I started getting the itch and saying, well, okay, had that rare opportunity of some disposable income. Things are going good. Let's kind of indulge this. So I have since been indulging that itch. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. I have to admit, when I was a kid and I saw that, because remember there was the Encyclopedia Britannica, and that was basically the internet.
Yep.
To have something about comics that was like in this thick thing, it was magical. And I do say Bibles, like, but I'm not being facetious. Yes, I mean there was something about that when you were a kid, and like, this right here is all about comic books, and that wasn't common because you never really saw things like that. I can remember seeing like the Marvel's Greatest Battles. I remember we had this place called Grover Cronin's, and I went downstairs and I saw the books, and I was like, "There's books on comic books!" Like that was insane to me.
Well,
but then
what I was going to say, John, is like we were unable to actually connect back then as fans. Like there was only a handful of folks who read comics or admitted to reading comics when I was a kid. It was so there's this pre-internet. Sometimes take the train, go up to New York City, and there's all these other people, adults actually, who collect these things. So even that part of the hobby in the 70s, it was just starting to formulate.
Yeah, and Stan always said that he believed that these books could be on like in libraries or in bookshelves. And back then I was like, that's impossible. Oh, Stan was right. And Mr. Vaughn, I got a question for you now. Okay, obviously when the guide first came out, it was kind of like in like a little more crude, and it was a little bit more like flimsy. When did it? talk about the time when you guys developed it to become this, like, let's make it a thicker book, and like,
Well,
who did
that
the
starts,
design?
it starts happening immediately after the first issue. You start adding pages. You start adding pages because you start adding content. On a slow year, we add 17 pages. And that's now. Back then, where there was all these comics undiscovered, it could be even more. And you get up to square bound and even hardcovers in very short order. And some of those end up being some of the rarest editions of the guide that there are. I mean, not rare like the white cover #1, where I think it's been $35,000 for a 9.6 at Heritage. But the whole thing about it, like Brian, where you were in, you said Hoboken?
Well, I grew up in the New Jersey Shore.
Oh, okay, all right.
I mean, I did eventually live in Hoboken. That was during my college years.
Oh, okay, all right. Because I for 2 years in between stints in Pittsburgh, I was up in Bergen County and Park Ridge, and I grew into like when I hit 12, I grew into allergies. We lived in front of a woods. It was a perfect storm. And I no kidding. I had a death rattle cough. I missed 5 straight weeks of school.
Ooh.
I had only ever read comics on car trips, shoe stores, and barbershop visits. Like I need that now. And
Neither does the
and but the whole thing about it was that my brother picked me up Cap 188, which isn't a particularly great issue, but it was everything to me, man. It was like I was gone off to the races. The fuel on the fire was I found Planet of the Apes magazine. I was actually a Planet of the Apes guy before I was a comic book guy. And Planet of the Apes #5. There was a Grand Union supermarket. There was a magazine store, a newsstand right next door to it. My mom would let me go that far when she was shopping, and there was Planet of the Apes, and I like. What? And that was it. It was over. Lifer right then, right there, and the whole thing about it was, a few years later, I moved back to Pittsburgh. I go to IDES, which is still in business, not in the same location. Their store then was where PNC Park now stands, at 11 Federal Street, and they had OverStreet #6, and I'm like, what is this? And then very quickly, I found a back issue #5 there. And I was like, this comes out every year. And so this goes back to what I said earlier, though. The improvements in it, the expanding, the going square bound, the having hardcovers, the having, multiple editions, limited editions, whatever. And people ascribing value to the guide itself, all comes about because of its trusted position, because of all the work that Bob put in, and all the information. One of the things, Steve, you touched on, and I think Brian, you might have mentioned too, is not only looking through the book and seeing the information, getting the information out of the ads. The ads were like, holy crap.
Send a self-addressed stamped envelope for
Yes.
Gary Goldoff or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Gary Dolgoff. Yeah, Gary.
Yeah, one of the great things, Richard Alf.
Every year.
One of the early San Diego guys. I mail ordered for. I had a guy in 8th grade in my art class really want my Invaders 2. and he kept on throwing comics in to sweeten the deal.
Oh, nice.
And he threw in Iron Jaw 1 and 4.
Okay.
And they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They looked like Marvels I didn't know.
Right.
And little did I know that this guy, from this transaction with this guy, sent me down the Atlas Seaboard rabbit hole that I've been in ever since.
Awesome.
And I mean, seriously, to the point that I put Iron Jaw on the cover of the first Lost Universal book. And it really is this thing of what gets us going. And you realize, given that I work for Steve Jeppe, and given his rather noted collecting habits, I like literally the first Mary Marvel I ever held, #1, the first one with the Mile High copy.
Whoa.
Okay. we had immediately across the hall from my office, we had a library, and I knew the combination to the door, and it was great. We had a fake Remington as a doorstop, but people thought it was a real Remington because everything else in there was super pricey.
Right.
And so I just like grab it, put it in front of the door to hold it open, and like, what? And but we had All American 16, Marvel 1, Flash 1,
Wow.
Detective 27, Amazing Fantasy 15, Superman 1,
Oh,
all in this one case. And this is, you're working around this, all of that, and I'm obsessed with Atlas Seaboard. But it's whatever. This is the whole thing, man.
What do you think is the kernel of your attraction? Because I mean, I dig Atlas as well. What is the kernel of the attraction? What is it about Iron?
I was mystified when I got this catalog from Richard Alf, and the quick backstory to this is Marvel Holiday Superhero Grab Bag. Second one, 1974, then 1975. 1975 had Nick Fury number 10 in it.
okay.
I loved that book, that story so much. I had to have the comic. That was the first comic I ever mail ordered. And so with that, I got the catalog. And none of the Atlas Seaboard books went any higher than number 4.
Right.
And I had number 4, and I knew when it was published. And that was 2 years before I ever got it. And I'm like, it made no sense to me that a comic company could go out of business
that quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the more I was devouring their bullpen bulletin pages anytime I could get one of their books. And here's Larry Lieber, and that's Stan's brother, and all this stuff. This guy worked on Iron Man, and some of the stuff was so cool. And and a couple of some of the books started out cutting edge. I mean, with Chaykin's Scorpion, of course.
Sure.
And very early Larry Hama doing Wolf.
Yep.
And the more I knew of the creators that were involved and the business decisions and things like that, it didn't become any less fascinating. And in fact, it became more fascinating, and I became more annoying.
Well, it's fascinating that you say Seaboard Atlas, because one day I was at some weird market and they had comics for 10 pence. Okay. And I was like, oh, I can get 3 or 4 comics for that. And I picked up a comic called Planet of Vampires.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, I looked at the logo and I was like, and I looked at all the credits and I was like, oh, I don't recognize any of the. Oh, it's 10 pence, And so I took it home, and in fact, I think I read it on the train on the way back, and I get it's slightly Marvel-ish, but then this story was like, because at the end of the issue, there's like 1,000 of these people, vampires, running toward them, and they're all in their astronaut suits.
Yeah.
But then I went to my comic shop again. I went, have you ever heard of this? And he goes, oh, you'll never be able to get those. And I was like, why am I alive? Can someone please kill me? But Brian, I wanted to get into something about the thrill of when you published Lady Death.
Yeah.
Then you get the first guide and you open it up and you see your title in there. Yeah. Okay, and believe you, I know everyone here remembers Lady Death was as hot as blazes.
That's right.
Everyone ordered 5 copies thinking, oh, who cares? And it was sold out within 0.001 seconds.
Yes.
So when you opened up the book, I mean, were you just like staring at it for hours going, I did that?
That's crazy.
So true. Absolute thrill to know to be included in, such an esteemed guy, but it made me feel like I was part of the club. And it was a wild ride. When Lady Death 1 came out, that same weekend, myself and Stephen Hughes traveled from Arizona here to New York City, and we witnessed the book go from cover price to like about $9 over the weekend. And then that comic just took a ride for close to 2 years. Not only did it dominate, I think, Fan Magazine, which I see some in the back here, Wizard, it was incredible. But it's beautiful. That cover to this day just still stands the test of time that Stephen Hughes did. And yeah, of course, it's just a thrill to be included because, it's just being part of a club. Again, I always come from this perspective that we work, whether it's true or not, like, we were outsiders or we're not invited to the club. So to kind of be invited to the club is kind of cool. So yeah, absolutely cool.
One of the things about the first cover you popped up there, Overstreet's fan number 4, that's the variant cover.
Mm-hmm.
We did a variant cover
Beautiful by
for number 3, which came out at San Diego in 95, and that was She by Billy Tucci, and that was literally the first cover I ever commissioned.
Oh, fantastic.
And then this one came at number 4, and I think either Mike Reniger or Joe Rybant commissioned that one. Do you remember who you were working with?
Yeah, Mike Reniger.
Was it Mike Reniger?
Yeah.
And then Joe was the guy who tracked all the prices on the modern stuff. And now Joe is the senior editor at Dynamite.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where there was such excitement going on in the marketplace. And I think that while the phrase bad girl may have served you and Billy, it was also broadly used to insult you guys, lump you in with other people of inferior product. And that this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about the staying power of your fans and your vision. And the same for Billy, is that's why those guys came and went. And you guys are still here, and we're still talking about people collecting and enthusiastically collecting your stuff.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think part of it is just dumb persistence too, because people, and it's probably true of everyone's personal experience. People, counted me out the whole way, or every so often it's like, oh, that guy doesn't have another trick up his sleeve, but I just don't listen to that stuff. I don't know better. I'm just very enthusiastic about what it is that I personally want to do, and I just continue to pursue that. So, we did get kind of like, criticized a lot, let us say, or people who never even read the comic would sort of like, denigrate it or simplify it. Right. And it's funny because, it's people who just didn't really read it, because obviously you can't have an actual fan base unless there's something you could actually read or feel like you really got something out of, especially for 30 years independent. But, and I'm not saying it's War and Peace, but I do think it's, in the case of Lady Death, at least, it's a story, really is a story of persistence. And although the story is called Lady Death, I assert it's really about life. It's about like, just stacking up against those odds all the time and getting up when you get knocked down.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about that is 1994, the industry is beginning to creak a little bit. I'm working behind the counter, but the first signs of doom are arriving. And people began to come off their subscription lists. I don't know if you guys ever remember this, but there was a story called The Clone Saga. And all the Spider-Man fans came in and said, "Take me off. I'm off every book." I was like, calm down. Like, I want 5 books a month off. Quite quickly, I became aware that there were people coming in and reading who weren't Marvel or DC fans. They would come in and they were either going to be into Lady Death, or they was like, "I love Evil Ernie. Oh, I want a Vampirella." And I'd be like, "So, what do you think about Thor?" They're like, "I'm not reading kid stuff. I'm into the serious stuff." I'm like, "What do you mean you're going to read any of the stuff I like?" I said, we're moving beyond you now, Steve. So they pushed me off in the corner, and I just lay there as a broken body, and they're reading like the new material. But that's, for those of us, again, I was working behind the counter. I experienced that. And of course, that begat in the end, the 5,000 different Rob Liefeld bad girls that came out through Extreme. And then, you had Witchblade come out, which turned Image Comics around completely, because Image was dying. Okay. And so I don't think you would have had Witchblade if you hadn't had Lady Death.
Yeah, maybe true. And I mean, it's interesting. I'd say to those guys, that work is valid. That, Witchblade, Darkness, Cyberforce. I'm like, guys, keep that in print because people love it. I loved it. Where is it? Come on, let's come back.
You know what? I was in a comic book store at that time too. And Brian, I have to tell you though, it's hilarious because you knew the people who were collecting Lady Death. You got like that goth. You got
Right.
the goth people, and you
Yeah.
got a lot of the headbanger people and all that stuff. And I saw that because, working in the comic book store, oh, there's Lady Death right there. There's Evil Ernie, and you get that like the little stack. It was great because you caught that market, and they just and what just so you know. How you saying how story matters? I don't know, because I asked one of these girls, I was just like, oh, do you like Lady Death? She goes, yeah, I just like the pictures. I go, do you read it? Nah. so you got one that way. I remember that specifically.
However,
Listen, sorry, Brian. I'm just going to say there's always people that are going to be into something iconographically.
Yep.
But the fact is that, man, I think what I find the most impressive is how devoted some of these folks are to the storyline. And I think that's okay. If you just step back and you say, hey, I'm the OverStreet guy, it's my job to know what people are reacting to. And then you go, yeah, they've been reacting to this for 30 years. There's something there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Going back to the OverStreet and its power.
Yes.
About maybe a year and a half ago, I walk into our, workstation, grading area, and there's like 12 people all grading, and there's, we got some older books in, and they were a young group of people. They weren't used to books, so everything was computer, and they're working away, and they're stuck, because we had some old books, we had some Harveys, we had some like old stuff. And they were like going online, and I was like, how long is it taking you to find that? They're like, well, it's been like 10 minutes. And I went, oh my God. And I called the supervisor over, and I was like, where's your OverStreets? Where are your OverStreets? This person's been wasted 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I said, stay right here. I went to my office. I said, what's he looking for? Oh, boom, open the page. Look, there it is. Boom. And they were like, wow. And it was like I had, like they talk about technology from before Atlantis being more, technological than we have today.
Yeah.
They were like this. That's available in a book. It was just really weird. These young kids in their 20s, they're all smart and savvy, and they couldn't find a damn Harvey book. And I'm like, okay. And I said, by the way, just open it up. Yep. Oh, you're working in World's Finest. Don't bother. Open it up, take a little look right there. And they were just like amazed. So pretty soon, of course, I love the big version, the big OverStreets.
Yeah.
So I got like 4 or 5 of those, and I said, boom, boom, boom. And I said,
when did those start coming out, though, Steve? When did those start coming out? I remember seeing them for the ones with the ring
spiral bound. Yeah. I hate the spiral bound, by the way. I hated the spirals. As soon as they went to the true, square bound.
I have to say that the funniest part about that is it's a lesson in you can't please everybody. The square bound I just infinitely prefer. It does everything except fold all the way over. It lays flat. You can sit on a row of long boxes and still use it, and it's absolutely fine. And matter of fact, we switched to a brighter, lighter paper last year, and it's even it's literally about 15% lighter now. We started doing that. We got to the point where I think it was like around number 38 where I was going to lose like $3 a copy. And that doesn't seem like a business model to me. And so I was the swinger of the axe on that one. And then I was at a Diamond Retailer Summit at C2E2 doing roundtable discussions with the retailers right before number 42 was solicited. And they said, oh, you got to bring that back. You got to bring that back. And I was like, yeah, I can't lose money on it. I can, it doesn't have to be a profit center, but it can't lose money. And I said, what price will you guys support? Will you guys go $45? And they're like, yeah, I'll go 50. And I'm like, okay. And I walked out. I literally in 10 minutes, bumped into my printer rep. He said, yeah, we can do that. I can definitely bring it in underneath that. And I said, okay. I called Fred Pierce at Valiant, and I said, hey, can we have a cover? Do you have something in the can? Because they were just restarting Valiant at that point. I knew they'd have something in the can because they had such great promotional artwork, and I love the Valiant characters, so that was an easy one. So like literally in the space of an hour and a half, I restarted that book, and it really has sold out on a pretty regular basis, faster and faster each year. There was a little hiccup in Diamond's delivery of it this year, so it didn't break the record again. But up until it still sells great, and the great thing about this, I get to have a lot more pick of what's on the cover and not worry about whether it's something like that. It doesn't have to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Lady Death or anything that's going to sell like crazy, because the people that are buying this book are going to buy this book. But so when we stopped doing the spiral bound, I was so happy because I can put them on the shelf now.
Yes.
And
those
rather than stacking them, and we got all these complaints. Yeah, I'm just going to take it to the printer and cut off the side and have my own spiral made. I'm like, okay.
You know what? Sometimes our comic dealers, especially the older guys, they really are an odd bunch. They'd be like, you'll go and visit them and they're living in a caravan. They don't even have a toilet, and they're like, I've got my timelies in the back, $3 million worth, and they've got no teeth. They're the ones that are like, I'm going to cut my guy and I'm going to. We really do have the strangest little industry. Someone goes, oh, I need to find out about such and such. Oh, you need to talk to Big Mike. Oh, okay. When you finally meet Big Mike, he's got like a food stain. Because he's got food stains out. Oh, yeah, there's a variant that came out in 1942 and it had a little toy that was attached, but the glue was made of such and such. God, you're an odd person, but the information is incredible.
It's like The Simpsons. The Simpsons got it right? The Simpsons got it right.
That always reminds me, and I'm sure maybe Brian, and then of course you, JC, when you opened up that guide when you first saw it, you saw the information being laid out. I was like, someone's writing this. Someone knows this. And I immediately placed the writers and whoever it was and the people who are adding and putting information in on pedestals. I just imagine like these comic gods standing out and they're like, what do you want to know? Oh, 4-color issue 923. Yes, that's, and what really made it for me, and I was able to tell Bob this when I met him. When I open up the page, the section for Classics Illustrated, and I'm going through, and it's the most magnificent indexing and work that's ever been done in comics, as far as I'm concerned, on any title. Even more impressive than 4-color, because it has all the different printings. And I'm going through, and it has a little verbiage then it tells it was written by this person, and I was just like, this guy walks on water. That's how powerful he is. To have this amount of knowledge. And at that young age, I said to myself, I need to get to a level where I can contribute to this book. Somehow, by hook or by crook, I have to be able to like say, and get my name in there. I'm not going to be, I'm going to be looking at, as Jim Shooter had said, on the shoulders. I would just see their feet. But, when I finally got my first, work printed, so embarrassing. I went around to every single dealer in San Diego with the page open. Did you see this work on Captain America?
That's huge.
Right down and like, get away, Steve. Come on, you're an idiot. You're crazy.
Yeah. Go ahead now.
Yeah, well, I wanted to get into something, and JC, maybe we talked about this a bit in the past, but with the OverStreet being such an in-depth book, right, with such a breakdown of everything, what was the impact when this little book hit the stands?
Oh, yeah.
Wizard starts coming in with their own price guide stuff.
Yeah, can I? This is I think a lesson for everybody in business.
Good question.
If OverStreet and some of the people working for Bob at that time had not had this idea that comics ended in 1969, there wouldn't have been a foothold for Wizard.
Mm-hmm.
That was absolutely a mistake on our part. That said, Wizard was the catalyst to an awful lot and would do that in a way that we never would. The one thing the guide will never do is speculate. And while Wizard was absolutely freaking entertaining, I mean, Twisted Mego Theater and casting calls and all sorts of stuff like that. What was not to enjoy about that? And I never really had a feel that the editorials were really from Garib. I always thought that was just staff stuff, and that's just my experience in journalism, was that the person on the masthead isn't the person doing the talking. But honestly, Wizard was such a force, but they also clearly engaged in speculation. My classic example of that was Wetworks, when it had gone up in price for a year before it came out.
Wetworks,
And as an OverStreet guy, truthfully, that used to drive me nuts. But one of the things that Steve Jeppe, Bob Overstreet, like I mentioned, John Snyder, my old boss, one of the things that those guys were so great about was showing me about being bigger than things and not being threatened by it, being challenged by it. It's a different thing. And so when in our Scoop email newsletter, one of the first big interviews I ever did was with Garib. So like, hey, that's absolutely fine. We'll interview him. Why not? I'm a big believer that competition makes us stronger. It shows you your own weaknesses if you're willing to see them. I absolutely believe that a policy within OverStreet gave them the entry to the marketplace. Well, that was our failing. By not staying up in contemporary thing. And you know how that happens? When you've got the Silver Age. If you're of a certain age, what does all this Bronze Age stuff look like to you, except, oh, they're just trying to replicate the success of that. Now, if you're a Bronze Age guy like me, this is freaking gold.
Right.
Yeah, I think we've got three Bronze Age guys right here. I think.
If you're talking Micronauts, you're talking supervillain team up.
Yeah.
And so you see all this stuff. What you need to do is look at your I don't want to throw this into modern terminology of catching your own biases, but you do have to. You have to look at it and say, where are my shortcomings? I always try to know somebody that knows way more about manga than my limited knowledge of Lone Wolf and Cub and Akira. Yeah. And I'm fairly conversant on those properties. And beyond that, it's a wilderness to me.
Yes.
Yes. And I my goal is always be the smartest manager in the room, the hardest working manager in the room, not the smartest guy in the room. Because if I'm the smartest guy about manga, you're screwed.
Hey, it's exactly the same for me when it came to Lady Death.
That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. And Steve, since I recruited you to be an advisor, I'm always after people with more expertise than me.
Yeah, Steve, that's what I mean. I know your history. I know all about you. But why don't you talk about, Steve? Why don't you talk about your entry, like how you got that, and how you managed to even type the first few pages? I don't know how you got through it.
Well, for me, I was under the this is really weird, but I was under the impression. Can you remember the scene from what was it, Saving Private Ryan, where they had that office where all the girls are typing? Yeah. I imagine that was the research team for OverStreet. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it as easy as possible so they don't go, oh, God, look at this guy. He's just writing with crayon. So what I did was I actually typed out, and then, JC will know this, I typed out exactly how it is in the guide.
Oh.
And then what I did was I put in bold anything that I was changing. So it was an exact duplicate of what had come before, and they could see what I wasn't touching. And then they had all these different changes that were in bold. so that they didn't have to look at all of it. They could just look at the stuff that was in bold and go, "Oh, this is what he's doing." And it was an exact duplicate. And the reason I thought that was, I don't want these guys to work too hard. I don't want them to be like, "Oh, we got to do more search." They could look at it and go, "Oh, okay, so all right. Oh, look at the price he's got for Captain America 156 because of the white cover. Oh, okay, boom, right there." And then I remember I emailed and it's like, "Say, yeah, did you get my, Captain America?" Like, yeah. Bob read it over the weekend, and we're just putting it right in. And I went, "You guys aren't gonna like edit it?" He goes, "No, everything just gonna go right in." And I began to panic, and I was like, "They're not even gonna check." So I went through and I was double checking, and there's like there was like one little tiny mistake, and I was like, "Oh no." When the guide came out, I looked at it. That mistake was just a little tiny thing. I was like, "Ah!" But yeah, I wanted to make it easy. I didn't want to send in a list of just like cool things. So whenever I do that, I just write out the guide exactly how it is, and I do all the indentations, and then I just add my pieces like that.
When John Domayan came on as an advisor, and the first conversation I had with him was he told me about Steve and said, this guy is your prime candidate. And
he's going to break the doors down and he's going to destroy. He better be.
The funny thing about this is you have no idea how many advisors join representing a retailer or an auction house or something like that. And immediately they've got somebody else they want to get on board. And they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you take it with a grain of salt. You hope they're telling you the truth. You expect that they're doing PR. And then Steve's stuff started coming in. And we all start circulating it. Like, holy crap, this guy knows his stuff. And then we'd send it to some of Bob's key advisors. "Hey, check this out. Tell us what you think." And so it was a little simple. It was a little more convoluted than, "Hey, Steve, it's going straight into the guide." It was actually vetted. But what Steve did, and this goes back to what I was saying before about looking at your own limitations. What Steve did was go after different sections of the guide each year, and his first 3 or 4 lined up with my list of weaknesses that I had said, we are way off on this. We are way off on this. We are way off on this. For years, there was just this gaping hole, Green Lantern, Green Arrow 76. Oh my gosh, we were wrong on that book for so long. But you know what it was? Bob has said this the entire time I've worked for him. And that's this. The guide is only as good as the information we get. Nobody had documented it. Everybody knows, but nobody had sent in any information on it that was confirmable. Mm-hmm. Soon as they did, boom, price gets fixed.
I think when it comes to my finest hour in the guide, when I was doing the Thor entry, I was like, I wonder how detailed I can get. And I was like, and in issue 390, Captain America lifts Thor's hammer.
That's right.
No one had ever noticed it. No one cared. And I made a notation.
Wait, Steve. The guy right below here did. The guy below. Don't discredit that. Okay, go ahead. Proceed, Steve. Proceed.
So, I'm at San Diego. I get the preview copy. I open it up and I see it. And I remember, I'm not going to mention his name. I went over to a dealer that I know. And I was like, yes. I said, look, I did Thor. And he's like, looked over and I said, and he grabbed the book. He's looking at it and he goes, I said, take a look at issue 390. And he went, oh, you think that's important, huh? And I remember I sank. It was like this glass shattered inside my body because I'd gone up like, oh, and he was like, that's important, huh? Oh, okay. He handed me the book back. And I saw I walked away. It was just like a broken bird with his wings you know. And then a couple of years later, we're watching the movies. So that's my claim to fame. I put that in the authority.
I'm just saying that dealer, after he downplayed it to you, went and bought every copy he could.
The other thing. So Brian,
Yeah.
let's go in ending and wrapping this all up. First, let's start with you here. What does the OverStreet mean to you? Tell what from the like we know what it means to Steve. It's the essence of his being. But what does it's go? Tell us what it means to you, the whole thing.
Well, I think first up, I think I'm in this sort of company that would understand that I don't believe that I picked comics. I think comics picked me.
Yeah.
But something happened in that interplay between words and pictures when I was a child. Even long before I read, I would go to these little auction houses and see the comics with the top third of the books ripped off, and you could buy them for just pennies and nickels. And I just connected. So the guide actually kind of represents, it's sort of like the mother box or the cosmic cube. It's the thing that gives you, it is that which is the information.
Yeah.
I was lucky in the 70s to know what Robert Overstreet looked like because I would read the cool fanzines. I was reading things like, CBG I had a subscription to since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And then there was another one? Whatever ones I was reading. So he looked like an authoritative man, so it would make sense that he's representing this consortium of people who coagulate all this information. But what was neat as a collector, I would go into New York City or I'd go to shops because before the known comics market, there still were back issue shops. It might be whether it be the pharmacies or old bookshops. Yeah. I could bring the guide and kind of really have a sense of what is it that I am looking at. And, ever since, it's one of those probably the mainstays of our business, sort of like the spine in a sense of the business and the holder of its history. And, one thing that we've only touched upon is the phenomenal history of the cover work. Here's number 10, I believe it is. And here's a gorgeous Alex Schomburg.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful.
And the list goes on. I mean, it's just, one after another. They're quite wonderful. In any event. So what it means to me is, look, again, I didn't pick comics. Comics picked me. Comics are obviously, the most important thing outside of, my wife, my dog, my main relationships. I just have this thing about comics because, John, if I'm not during the day publishing comic books, at night and weekends, I'm collecting them.
There's a lot of Post-it notes in those, price guides.
Well, for fun, if you will indulge me.
Absolutely. Come on.
I would love to share with you guys. So here's, again, the 1976 comic price guide. Will Eisner.
Give him the big head now.
For fun, I looked up some of the prices. So, okay. Amazing. Let's look at Amazing Fantasy number 15. First appearance, Spider-Man. Bridges the gap between the suspense comics and superhero comics. Here's number 15 in mint, $160.
Wow.
Let's look at Avengers number 1 if you were so lucky.
No.
Avengers number 1 for $40. And
what was number 4?
Dude, Avengers number 4, the first modern age appearance of Captain America was $2 in mint.
No, this is hurting me.
It's right there. $2 in mint.
No, that's a typo. Come on.
Give us more.
Golden Age Captain America number 1. Big book, $1,500 at that time. Yeah. As we sit in OverStreet number 53, I think CA1 go in mint, if such a thing exists, is $715,000.
Wow.
And I can tell you that's conservative.
Yes.
Yeah. These are all raw copies. Yeah. This is, here's just 2 more for fun. Spider-Man number 1, an important Marvel comic. I know I'm with a bunch of Marvel fanatics. Spidey 1, mint, $160.
Wow.
And then referring to my aforementioned X-Men number 1, in 1976 in mint was going for $25. So X-Men, so a couple of those again. Let's take a look at real quickly. X-Men #1 right now, as we sit, 185K in mint.
That's crazy.
Thank you, Professor Pulido. But I got to tell you something.
Inflation.
You being a little kid,
Yeah,
and bringing the price, you actually brought the OverStreet with you. That okay. That is so remarkable. I mean, like,
he gets instant gravitas with that.
Yes. Me and Steve have done some, like, we bleed this stuff, like you. We bleed. But that's very impressive, because when I got that OverStreet the first time, just to have it, I remember that was a tough book to get too, because that was kind of expensive, especially for a little. I was very young, but I never thought of like going to the comic book store and looking at the pages. I just thought it was something you did back home, like you just looked at. But because I was still so young, I didn't really get it. But I just thought, I liked it more for the ads, to be honest. But it was great. But to actually do that at a young age, very impressive, sir.
Until adolescent testosterone in women. Yes. Evil genius comic collector until that time.
Mr. Vaughn, the same question for you. The whole thing as a whole.
I actually want to digress for a minute and say that I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I love talking about this stuff. And Brian, the way you said it, it shows you. I was in Cardiff for a day, and Wales this past summer, and I walked out of Cardiff Castle, and across the street, just as in days of old, there was a Forbidden Planet.
Oh, cool.
And I walked across, and I'm like, this is perfect. I'm doing stuff I love, and I walk across the street into a comic shop. How great is that?
Yeah.
And when I was at Comics Pro in Pittsburgh last February, I got in Ides after hours. And if you had told 13-year-old Jeff that, I sure as heck would have wanted to believe you. I still get excited about that stuff. And Brian, your point about if you're not publishing and making comics, you're collecting and reading comics. And that's why I'm so vigilant about the stuff I don't like. I don't waste time doing reviews on stuff I don't like. I just don't read it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there's enough negativity out there that Scoop only has positive reviews, but we won't fake it. If we don't like it, it's not in there. Right. And this gets to the whole thing for me about the guide. And you mentioned the covers, and one of my joys every year is I work with the top artists in our business.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't have to work with anybody for whom this is not a bucket list item. There are people who want to do this. The day I met Mark Chiarello, when he was still VP at DC, he said, I'd cut off my foot to do an OverStreet cover. And I'm like, yeah, you should probably tell me that after we negotiate. I don't know. I'm not all fancy or anything, but seriously, think about it. After starting with the first art cover is Don Newton, who goes on to be a great Batman artist, but it was very early in his career at that point. But then you hit number 5, 6, and 7. 5 is Kubert, 6 is Eisner, 7 is Barks.
Yeah.
Okay. My approach to the guide every year is this is the gauntlet that Bob laid down for me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Okay. And so it doesn't have to be an artist of their caliber every year. It has to be as good.
Right.
I have to put my best thing out there. When Jimmy Palmiotti calls me, when Price Guide 39 hits the stands and says Darwin wants to do a cover, my job is to not say Darwin who.
Right.
Right. And
yes, there it is. Let me zoom in on that. That's such a great cover.
That cover came in 12 hours before previews went to press.
Wow, cool.
Oh my word.
And all we had to do was drop in the script OverStreet.
Wow.
Everything else Darwin had done.
And he's such a good guy too, Darwin. He was such a great guy.
But if you look at it, the Schomburg cover you did, Wally Wood, you mentioned, Steve, you mentioned number 15, CC Beck. I was not a Captain Marvel fan. And that original hung over our photocopier when I first started at Gemstone. And I looked at it every day and fell in love with it.
Amazing.
And,
Wow.
and John, you mentioned the Ron Diaz Snow White cover. And then you got Carmine Infantino. The fact that I worked, I worked with and had many conversations with Murphy Anderson, and we had a number of Alex Ross covers going a different direction. John Romita Jr., John Romita Sr. It's just, I commissioned a cover by Joe Simon.
Mhm.
I mean, this stuff blows my mind. And again, I get evangelistic about this, but I start talking. If you tell 13-year-old Jeff, he would have believed. He would want to believe. No, 13-year-old Jeff would have believed you. Yeah, I always do it. 16-year-old might have been a little skeptical. But I mentioned my old boss, John Snyder. I had to browbeat him for 5 years to get him to let me use his son, John K. Snyder III.
Okay.
As a cover artist, because he made it my call because he didn't want to be the one saying his son was getting a cover.
Gotcha.
And he's just so much great stuff. And I think about all these people that I worked with, Joe Jusko,
It's great.
and George Perez.
Oh
Yeah.
George.
And Jim Lee.
Yeah.
And Rob
Yes.
Liefeld. And
Todd McFarlane.
Yeah.
And sometimes the stories I can and can't tell about this stuff behind the scenes, what it took to get these things done. And Amanda Connor and Adam Hughes and
Murderer's Row.
Yeah, and J.G. Jones. And I worked for 15 years to get an unpublished Joe Shuster Superman. And when I went to, and one of the great things, I went to Alex Sinclair, one of the greatest colorists in the business. And he sent me 6 different interpretations of the colors.
Oh, neat.
Because he was so excited to do something that nobody else could do, a Joe Shuster original.
Wow.
And Jim Steranko, Batman, and how get a call from Bob Overstreet, and he just says, Jeff, always wanted Steranko. To me, I'm a little kid when this stuff goes on.
I think we all are.
And I think that's the power of this stuff. Could I want to ask a question, Brian, that's unrelated to the Overstreet stuff.
Sure.
You've got Swornfest coming up.
We do.
What's the story with that for people who don't know?
So Coffin Comics has its own convention. It's called Swornfest. It is a 3-day event that happens in the city where our business is, Mesa, Arizona. We take over a local convention center, and it's just Coffin Comics based everything, artists, and it is adult targeted. So it's somewhere in between a biker rally and a comic book event.
Perfect.
Because it's folks who totally authentically love comics and Coffin Comics in particular, but it's very, very community driven. So it winds up being a hardcore group of like 400 to 500 people who all like the exact same thing, but really do come as far as from Australia, New Zealand, Europe, France to enjoy it all together. And it's generally, we're all up for 3 days and take over the local hotel. We do karaoke, we have bands. It's quite immersive.
Yeah,
It's a 3-day party.
There's going to be a lot of good things going on there, and you do the things with the coins, and I have a friend of mine. Her name is Jackie, and she's like when it comes to Lady Death and the bad girls, she's like the master. And I'm like, hey, do you want to go to the Swornfest? And she's like, oh. So I said, yeah. I said, I know Brian. He's going to have like a red carpet for us. As, you know, when we walk in, we'll just walk in like this. We're here.
That's
You know what I
right.
mean?
That's right. Come on down. Yeah, I mean everybody's
So, and this is a totally separate function from Tucson Comic Con. It's just Coffin Comics centric.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. So we also own, our household owns Tucson Comic Con, which happens during Labor Day. This year we're celebrating our 15th anniversary. Through the years, we've had a who's who of comics professionals and people in the world of the arts. But yeah, Sworn Fest is utterly just Coffin Comics. We do goofy stuff. I'll give you an example. We do a thing called the Sworn Party Olympics. So it is party games, but it's what you'd expect comic book people to do. So we'll do bag and board competition. Who could do 100 bags?
You sneaked in some of the fulfillment stuff.
Yeah, but you should have it with expensive comic books. Here's an action number 1. Ready? Right. Go. You know, people are with. That's awesome.
Like Niall said, this is how we get 1,000 books back and boarded really fast. But we do the Sworn, again, very immersive. In this case, I mean, we bring out 15 artists that are associated with Coffin Comics. Diego Bernard from Brazil, Mike Crome from Australia. The list goes on. People domestically, people here in our very talented Valley of the Sun, Arizona, and morning, noon, and night. Our Friday night format is it's just a gathering and it's a mixer. And one thing that I have found missing sometimes in convention events is we're all there for the same reason, but we may not know each other. So one of the first things that I do when everyone gathers is I say, please turn to the person to your left or to your right, stick out your hand and introduce yourself because you all like the exact same thing. And that begins a process where people just become bonded and lifelong friendships begin.
Yeah, and I know the same thing. We, one of my co-writers and I, Mark Haynes, we've been doing the Stargate comics for years. And even after we stopped, we go to GateCon in Vancouver. And it's the same small, hardcore contingent, you know, Australia, Japan, UK, all this kind of stuff like that. And you see the power of a group, a relatively small group of people who are interested in the same thing and how that can move the needle. And it's really amazing.
Yes.
It's a fun event. It's very exhausting. What's fun too, what I would say about it is that we transformed the entire convention center. We also give tours of our Coffin Comics offices. Now we just moved and we are at a breakneck pace completing our new building, which is larger, and decorating it. That's what we're doing nights and weekends to be ready to receive the Sworn on February 23rd, 4th, and 5th for Sworn Fest 2024. So yeah, it's very immersive. It's wonderful. It's super cool. Anyone kind of come out just to enjoy it. It's funny too. We have people like her. As you can imagine, a business like ours, we have people like, you know, our general counsel. So I've had, you know, the same lawyers for 25 years, kind of straight-laced, but they know what they're doing and they really looked out for our best interests. So we'll bring them out too. And then we have, you know, like our whole culture of people. And I'll stop everybody and say, look, see this guy with the suit? If you like what we do, thank him because he keeps us going. He keeps us in business. He's gotten us out of a lot of top spots.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yes,
great.
Like bankers and all that stuff coming by, you know, all the straight-laced looking people.
Yeah. Now, you do the Sworn thing, but also coming up is a new campaign is going to be launching. And you've got Lady Death Demonic Omens #1 coming out February 7th.
Featuring a cover by the legend Rob Liefeld, which is gathering a lot of attention. And it's true. We are doing our 19th Lady Death Kickstarter campaign, if you could believe it. And there's no stopping in our game. This kicks off a year-long storyline called Hellageddon. And this storyline celebrates 30 years of Lady Death.
Love it. I love it.
Okay, Steve, we're gonna in ending here. I just want to say that first off, thank you guys for coming and joining us. Brian, always a pleasure. JC, we're definitely gonna have you on again. I love it, and you know the backbone of all this stuff. I just want to throw out there is about the OverStreet, just how influential it really was. Because if you looked how that thing is set up, how many like toy guides came out after that, coin, you know, if you look at a lot of that stuff that it predated, it basically laid a foundation on how you do it. And I thought that was very interesting because as you know, like
there's a lot of, John, there's a tremendous amount of truth in what you just said. And there's one thing that I want to add to that. And that is Bob is unique in most of these price guides, not just for his dedication and his ethics and everything else like that, which I consider to be very impressive. But if you look at most of the price guides in their respective fields, they're by dealers, not collectors. And Bob was this guy who took a professional fan approach. He approached this by getting the most information he could from the dealers, from the auction houses, from the catalogs, from the private sales, and doing all of that. But he didn't do it with a bias toward them or a bias against them. And I think that's where the longevity of the book came from. There were contingencies that always said, "Oh, the guide's too high," and there's contingencies always said the guide's too low. And I had a during the 40th anniversary, I had a dealer stand up at our panel and imply that we were price fixing. And in the era of 5, 6, and 7-figure comics, we were only at 6 figures then. That's some really dangerous words,
Yeah,
and like we would literally at every advisors meeting that we had a lawyer stand up and say what you can't say at the beginning of the meeting. And one of the things about it was I was getting ready with this big political answer, formulating in my head, how am I going to not answer this? And this guy in the front row raises his hand and said, "Could I answer that first?" And in my head, I'm like, "Brother, buy me time." And the guy stands up and says, "Hi, I'm a scientist with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA, and I've done a study of the guide over its 40 years.
Wow.
And in the end, it's almost always right. It may take a while." And I'm like, "Okay, next question."
Wow.
And it was, it's the kind of thing, like I said, we're always seeking better information. I don't know what better protection than us getting cocky there is.
Yeah.
But once again, it laid down the foundation. If you see how it's set up with like the comics on the top, like you notice that a lot of those guides, even like those handheld guides, they copied and even as a kid, I was like, that's just like the OverStreet. So I'm just saying, how
imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, brother.
Absolutely. And
now, I do want to say one thing, and so you guys probably get that my love for this is really sincere. I was able to do this. It's called OverStreet at 50, 5 decades of the OverStreet comic book price guide. And it was done for the 50th anniversary. And one of the things that comics is no worse than any other industry. Yes, Niall, thank you. Comics is no worse than any other industry, but we all have a habit of honoring people when they're gone.
Right.
And I've always strived when people have made me, there have been some people that were added to the OverStreet Hall of Fame that would have got there anyway, that I knew maybe they were sick. And things like that. And I'm a big believer in that it doesn't hurt you to recognize the people while they're here. And it's seriously, I used the word earlier and I mean it sincerely. It's a blessing. Bob OverStreet is 85 years old and still working on this book.
Yeah.
Okay. But I wanted him to have a thank you note from me. And that was a multi-100-page thank you note from me and a bunch of other people in the industry. Steve, you were in that book. And the whole thing about it is, you got to celebrate this stuff. And what Brian's doing with Swornfest and what I was trying to do with that is you got to celebrate this. If you love this stuff so much, I write comics in my free time. I collect comics. I read comics, and I work bloody well more than full-time in comics. If comics go south for me, I'm hosed. I have to do stuff to maintain my enthusiasm, and that means celebrating the stuff you enjoy. And that's my wish for everybody.
I preach to the indie comics community. When they're talking about how do I do this, how do I do that, I say, do you know who Brian Pulido is? And they'll say yes or they say no. And I say, study what he does. Study what he does. Captures enthusiasm.
Brian, I would argue, are you really independent anymore? You're such part of the ether. I don't know. I wouldn't even.
Well,
I don't
would
know.
say,
He's an independent publisher, man.
I know we talk about 1994, but when it comes to Kickstarters, I think sort of Brian really pushed that. I didn't know anything about Kickstarters until I saw the 6,000 Lady Deaths, Kickstarters that are coming out, and I was like, wow. And again, one of my my friends, she's like, oh, I got this, I got that. I'm doing this Kickstarter, and I'm like, what is that? I had no idea what it was. I was like, okay. And when it was explained to me, I was like, this is the next level. Oh my God, what's being done? I was completely unaware. And again, I think, and this is not blowing smoke, I think when it comes to the Kickstarters, I think you're like, you're right at the cusp. You're like the cutting edge of those Kickstarters.
Well, I mean, I'm bragging when I tell you that as you and I speak tonight, Coffin Comics has raised $9.6 million for Kickstarter projects for comics. And it really just grows out of a need, right? I thought that I needed to connect directly with the people who might enjoy this. So, and I come from like working class people. We get up, we go to work. So, which I'm very proud to do. And I love it. I find something very sacred about working, but that makes it a difficult thing for people to compete against. Cause I know I'm just willing to work much harder than most. And because I love it and I find a lot of meaning in work. So, I feel very lucky, and it was really a beginning to use Kickstarter as a publishing model in 2015 was a new lease on life because my career at the time was sort of just rambling, and I chose to take another shot, and we've been blessed.
One of the things about that, and I was interviewing Billy for the She the Way of the Warrior #1 30th anniversary edition. And one of the things is Billy's told a bunch of the different stories surrounding the background. I was trying to help him get it into a chronological fashion where it was all in more or less a definitive statement about it. And one of the things he said is it never occurred to him to not do this.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's a powerful thing. If I can get my own plug in here, Al Capone Vampire, #0, starts next week.
He doesn't have to use a bat. He doesn't have to use a bat. Get it? Does he have to use a bat?
Listen, if you see Mark Wheatley's cover on #3, he's got a bat in there. This is nice. This is John Snyder III's cover right there. Awesome. And Gene Gonzalez.
Yeah, that's a great cover.
A continuation of Vampire PA.
Great.
And the whole thing about this is that, Brian, you just touched on, is it's a way to connect with an audience. Everybody knows me as the OverStreet guy. I'm not ever insulted when people don't know me as a creator. I mean, I enjoy it when it happens. But this is a way for whether you are large with a great following or small with a hardcore but growing following, to reach your audience. And the great thing is, it doesn't represent any abandoning of the direct market. In fact, we can all funnel comics in that way. And like, we're not selling tons of back issues. I don't have tons of back issues, and there's no place better than a comic shop to find that kind of stuff.
You bet.
So the ecosystem is changing if we don't adapt to the change. And the amazing thing is, this is everything old is new again. This is like the people in the Middle Ages the rich people were patrons of the artists. Now it is the everyman as the patron of the artist.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When's your campaign launching?
I'm submitting for the approval on Kickstarter tonight, so I figured they got to be ready in a month or so. Sorry, that was a little dig. But my hope is Wednesday of next week. I really wanted Tuesday, but they're saying 8 days now.
Do members of the Al Capone family get free copies or what? What's going on there?
I would be glad to do that. That would be great PR. So yeah, absolutely, I would.
Hell yeah, it would. Hell yeah, it would. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Steve, get us out of here with Mighty Mystic Millionaire. This has been phenomenal. OverStreet forever.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.